I think it's time for us to move on to our hot topic presentation. Avi Sharma is here from Delta Consulting. He is going to be presenting on navigating general contractor delay claims. Now, Avi is a director at Delta Consulting Group and specializes in delay and damages. He has over a decade of international experience in the construction sector, and he's worked on a diverse range of projects, including commercial, heavy civil, institutional, industrial, educational, healthcare, mixed use, the list goes on and on. His expertise is in advising general contractors, subcontractors, design firms, legal professionals, and most importantly, project owners on litigation support, operational strategies, construction claims, scheduling, damage assessment, and risk prevention and reduction strategies. So, Avi, take it away.
Thanks, Jason. All right. Thanks for the introduction, Jason. This is more of a discussion. I think in the last few years, what I have seen, definitely on the Delta side, is a lot of the focus have become on claim avoidance piece, and the experts, the attorneys, everybody are getting involved early on in the process instead of later. There are a couple of change orders that I'm still reviewing in which attorneys are already involved, and we are all giving our thoughts in terms of approving those change orders. So that's why I think this topic, again, if anybody has any suggestions, want to discuss something, please unmute yourself. Let's have a conversation. I want this hopefully to be more of a conversation if you have any suggestions. Jason already given a pretty good background of my profile. The only thing I would add is I'm based out of Colorado. I'm based out of Colorado Springs, which is maybe an hour south of Denver. So that's probably the only thing I can add to it. While preparing for this, I was kind of trying to figure out which owners I have worked with, and my entire career mostly have been on the contractor side, boots on the ground. And I always tell people I'm always going to be a construction guy first, and whatever comes second is the second thing. So in terms of a lot of this experience that we're going to talk about, it comes from working in healthcare facilities, and some of the top healthcare facilities in U.S. Children's Hospital, UFL Kentucky, UC Health, in civic space in Denver. I work for Denver International Airport, City and County of Denver, City of Fort Collins, Bronco Stadium, which obviously is a cool place to work. And for those who recognize behind me, this is the Red Rocks Amphitheater in Morrison, Colorado. And if in the last few years after COVID you visited, I was on the project that did the stage, like renovation work and completing a new stage at Red Rock. So some of the cool projects you get to do, higher education, work with numerous universities and school districts all over Colorado, Wyoming, Montana, in the commercial space and aerospace. So a lot of this experience is coming from talking to these owners or working on their projects and figuring out what is going wrong. And then for Delta, I'm not going to go too much in detail. We have done a lot of projects. We are in a lot of places, and our recognition, who's illegal, GAR, AAC International, we're recognized in a lot of places. And we are based out of DC, but we have major offices in Denver, Houston, Orlando, Canada, and UK. And as you can see, we have done projects all across. All right, so when we are going through the claim process and even change orders early on, we find like very similar issues that are coming from the contractor and the owner side. And we're trying to find out what those similar themes are. So on the general contractor side, you will hear discontent due to owners' reluctance to authorize change orders. Change orders are just being pushed and pushed. by the owner. And in a lot of delay cases, we normally hear we'll resolve all the delays at the end of the project. We'll figure it out later, which is not a great strategy. And you will see why, because once the project starts going into more detail and there are more delays occurring every month to month, the delay analysis that was a very simple delay analysis at the start has become a very complicated change order now. So from a general contractor point, that's what happens. From the owner side, it's the displeasure regarding the change orders due to the lack of trust. It's always, I think GC's trying to take advantage of me. And we hear that from our owners almost every day. Um, on the general contractor side, especially since COVID, we have seen so much turnover that I have a project right now in which I'm working on, in which we have seen 7 project managers in a period of 2 years. So taking over projects with inadequate documentation and then creating a change order has been a huge challenge for general contractors. Similar on the owner side, they feel the documentation is insufficient to prove that there is a claim. So kind of similar themes there. Um, on the general contractor side, setting up or depending on a flawed baseline schedule. And as a scheduling and project controls person, I keep pushing my client to be like, the baseline doesn't have to be perfect, but it has to show what your plan is. And it has to include all the scopes of work. But unfortunately, in the industry, we find a lot of the baselines or most of the baselines being inaccurate, not the plan, missing scope, like a lot of issues with their baseline schedules. And now, when they have to create a claim, especially a delay claim on a delay claim based on that flawed baseline, obviously the results are not great just because the baseline was already flawed. So on the owner side, the problems is contractors are employing unconventional delay analysis. The contract says do a time impact analysis, but you're doing some kind of a random delay analysis just to prove your claim. And so that's kind of what we start seeing. Then we are also seeing a lot is assisting the owners by agreeing to a really aggressive schedule. The owner said, hey, I need this project done by May of 2025. The schedule is showing December of 2025, and you agree, you say, hey, if this change order is accepted, I'll do it. I'll make an effort to complete it. Knowing fairly well that the chances of that is very low. So contractor making those commitments, and then owners on the same side, if there's a very aggressive schedule, all the owners' activities have to be done quicker now, and the owners are not realizing that that's what they're also agreeing to. And then lastly, addressing issues months later in hope of securing an extension or time adjustment. So at the end of the project, general contractors open their profit loss for the project and they see a huge loss and they're like, why are we losing money? And then try to recreate to recoup some of the damages on the project. And then for the owner, that's a frustration. So referencing earlier project issues, and then going back 2-3 years trying to figure out what happened for those delays. So for the common themes, we are finding lack of trust being a huge issue between the owners and the contractors. Poor documentation, poor schedules, mitigating risk without considering the worst case of what can happen, and lastly, the lack of timely resolution. So those are kind of the themes that we're finding in the industry. The way we have done this presentation is I'll go through what a change order process should look like. We have 2 case studies that we have done, and then finally a couple of conclusions. And again, I would love to hear what others have done in this space for claim avoidance. So in terms of what you can do for the change orders, trust the early period of the project, the honeymoon period. Contractor just got the project, they're excited about it. The owners start seeing foundation coming out of the ground. It's a very exciting time. So use that honeymoon period to build trust and processes early on. And what are those processes? When you have early change orders, don't just approve it just for the sake of approving it. Hey, it's a $1,200 change order, doesn't matter, just I'll approve it. Make sure that you are in that early period setting expectation from the general contractor to say, I need backup, I need a backup from your subcontractor, your vendors. What are you putting in that even a $1,200 change order? Because then that same thing will be replicated throughout the project, and that would also help you with more trust. Now, schedule updates early on. The owners are not concerned about delay claims, and we tell all our owners that first of all, in your contract, if you can, please include you need to provide schedule updates every month in a native file. Just because once a delay claim occurs, the contractors will stop providing you native files, even if they were providing it before. And now you're in a situation in which you're analyzing all these delays based on PDF schedules. And some of these PDF schedules are thousands of pages. So schedule updates and native files. So set those expectations early when there is a lot of trust. And guess what? When you have all these documents with you, you will probably have more trust on your contractor as well. The other thing being also simply don't just be a document collector. I've been to a client in which they're like, hey, here's 50, 60, 70,000, documents that I've collected. And you're like, did you organize it? Did you reply to any of them? And they're like, nope, I just collect them and put this in this folder. So don't be a document collector, be collaborative. If a contractor is saying, hey, there is an issue, try to resolve those issues. So that's something to keep in mind as well. And then start the plan off correctly. What we mean by that is at the start, make sure you understand what the contractor's plan is, how the project would be built, what are the constraints, when does a specific utility relocation have to be completed by your gas agency, or when a specific bus stop has to be moved by the local transit body. Just understanding those things so you have those huge milestones. And then understanding your contract requirements early. What are your sequences? What are your phases? What's the notification requirement from the contractor, and making sure that those are being followed on the project. I talked to, and I'm not going to name the owner, but I talked to one of the owners and in Colorado, and they said, as soon as the project starts, we take the contract and put it in a drawer and close the drawer and lock it until there's a problem. And that's when I bring out the key, unlock it, and take it out. So don't do that. The contract is there to support you, and make sure you're executing the contract from the start of the project. Doing coordination with the contractor, like I said, being collaborative. I think that will make decisions easier. Paying them on time, determining delays on a month-to-month basis. We have been now retained on some projects to determine not just delays, but how the project is doing month to month. Not even just as an expert, but as a construction professional. So hire people if you need to look at the schedules in depth every month and see what is going on your project. We have obviously known this best documents wins, and sometimes contractors are good in documenting, sometimes they are not. So, but in most cases, we have seen owners not being great. So making sure that there's documentation for all the claims. And one of the points that I've kind of started in the previous slide, which is hire experts to understand schedule manipulations. Schedules are extremely complicated, especially when you're looking at, like I said, 1,000 paid schedules. And inherently, there is an advantage that the contractor has. The contractor has their scheduler, they have their project controls department, they have their superintendent who understands the most about that schedule. And then the owner's side, unfortunately, that's missing. Even with huge developers who have project managers, we realize that they're really good in terms of understanding maybe the plan, understanding the change order damages, but when it comes to schedule, they do not understand, or they can't even go to, for example, Primavera and try to see what has happened on that project. So that's why we're in a lot of cases, just getting involved very early. And what does that schedule manipulation looks like? So this is a very simple example of a construction schedule. It's a 15-month duration, and there has been 49 days of delay. Now, looking at this, it looks like a very simple month-to-month curve. The finish date or substantial completion date started on August 31st. It went up, came down, went up, and then eventually there was a 49-day delay. And looks like a very simple graphic, and you are kind of thinking, I can analyze what happened in these months. But when you really look at the schedule of what has happened, and even just update 1 to 2, you can see from August 31st to the second update, in which previously the date was, from June 12th, 2011 to somewhere around July 6th, 7th, 2011. But when you really see what happened is the progress delay was very limited. And what I mean by progress delay is somebody just simply inputted the progress and saw what happened on the project. But most of the delay came from the revisions made by the contractor to the schedule. So if you continue looking at these schedules, you will see this up and down zigzag lines. And in most cases, even if there is a delay, the progress delay might be on the owner or because of owner's action. The revision delays are mostly means and methods that the contractor follows. So they're masking some of these delays. And in this case, that's what you need to understand what's happening on a month-to-month basis. On a very high level, what that change management process looks like. First, you have the identification of the potential changes to contract. And there might be several reasons for it: design, errors, DSC, work sequencing, understanding those, and what does the contract say about those individual kind of delays. So once you identify it, the contractor submits change order request to the owner. And at that time, realizing that they provided timely notice of the change, it's not that case in which 3 years ago something happened and the owner did not get the opportunity to correct anything, and now this is a change order. So understanding that there was notice of the change or it was discussed, and then discussing the entitlement and the event occurrence in the change order request, and if those match up, and what backup is being provided to them. And initially, and this is coming from one of the project controls body, which is AACE International, in which the owner evaluates a contractor's entitlement. And at first, even before you talk dollar numbers, is this even a legitimate claim? Do you need more data? For example, do you need native files of the schedules to analyze the change order? So at first, the entitlement piece is figured out and agreed between the contractor and the owner. And after that, a detailed PCO with cost and everything else could be prepared by the contractor. And again, like I said, the best documents wins in change orders more likely than not. And sometimes it's as simple as that. There was a huge issue about flooding. The contractor said there was flooding, and the owner said, I don't think that impacted you. And then we basically just put these pictures on the change order and said, now you can decide for yourself if this impacted the project or not. And it became very clear. And then once the change order is submitted, owner approves or requires further discussions, and then finalize and sign the change order. And that's where I think if the parties have reached an agreement, then sign and execute the change order. If the owner believes there is something not correct and they disagree, we will still say owners should still sign a change order. And in government work, you will see a lot of unilateral change orders in which Navy or other government bodies will say, we agree to this much, and this is the signed change order for you. And if there's no change order, no agreement is reached, cancel the change work or perform the work and file a claim for the contractor. So two examples that I've brought in. One is from a mixed-use residential apartment in Mountain West, in which we were hired by an owner, a developer, to offer technical assistance and support um, for two parts of it. So this was an ongoing project. One was to analyze the delay portion of it. The contractor had a 200-day delay claim against the developer. And the second portion of it is they still wanted to see how we can improve the project. So there were a couple of very tight deadlines that had to be met. And what I think the owners were realizing is the more contentious the change orders became, the contractors started to not be as collaborative as previously. And they would say, this is the best date. There's no recoveries available. I can't do anything. This is what it is. So there was a contractor claim for 200 days. And the second part will happen I can tell you on all your projects, in which the owner will say, this is a change order, but contractor was delayed on third floor. I remembered that for 3 months, they didn't do a darn thing. And whether third floor was on the critical path, nobody knows. What happened on third floor completely, nobody knows. But contract owners will basically hang on to some of those specific examples they remember and say, and I think there's no delay claim because of that. And this was the case in this example, as in this case study as well. And then lastly, what I said, project recovery to finish because owner had a very tight deadline with the bank that they had to meet. So we analyzed the contractor claim by, first of all, recreating their own delay analysis. In this case, the contractor had given a 250-page delay report that they did in-house, which completely overwhelmed the owner. And any amount of expertise that they had on the schedules, unfortunately, there was not enough to respond to that claim. And what we started doing is basically recreating exactly how they did it, because at that point we started finding what assumptions the contractor was making in the delay claim. And it is extremely important from the owner side, from their construction professional side, how is that contractor creating the delay claim? In a lot of these cases, they will be creating something called a time impact analysis, which is more like a what if schedule. So in a what if schedule, you can manipulate that data in a lot of different ways. And that's what we usually find, that as a contractor, they will obviously manipulate to favor their numbers. And we analyzed it, and we basically came to the conclusion that, hey, we need to collaboratively talk about these delays. We can't just say everything is because of the owner, and on the other side, we also can't say everything is because of the contractor. So we collaboratively sat down with both parties. Once we completed our findings, then we said, here's what we found. Now let's discuss it and try to figure a more fair solution here. Secondly, we also sat down with the owners regarding that third floor delay that they remembered from the project. And we showed them, hey, third floor was on the critical path for 2 weeks. That 2 weeks will be on the contractor, but you say that they didn't do something for 3 months, that's what now the schedule shows. And so we discussed their findings and took that into consideration. And then what a lot of owners would not be able to do is the concurrent delay. So on a 5,000-page schedule, there are hundreds of critical paths. And to go through each one of them and say, this is because of the contractor, this is because of the owner, and trying to figure out which are concurrent delays. Because at the end of the day, as a scheduling professional, I used to think everything is about the schedule. But at the end of the day, it's all about the money, is what I'm finding. So the concurrent delays reduces the compensability. And so that's what we also did on this project. And lastly, what we did was the recovery. The owner believed there was 3 months that could be recovered in the schedule. The contractor believed that nothing could be recovered, and we went in, manipulated, or manipulating with the wrong word, but looking at the logic ties and saying, if you change this logic tie, this brings the schedule back by 10 days. And then going back to the contractor, similar in a collaborative way, and figuring out if that's a possibility or not. And eventually, we were able to reduce the schedule by a month and a half. So again, not exactly what the owner wanted, not exactly what the contractor wanted, somewhere in between. And so on this project, we ended up finding that the 14% of the delays were because of contractors' mismanagement, and then we found almost 30% were concurrent delays. So reducing 44% of the claims compensability and 14% of the time extension on this project. Another similar example, but a little bit of a different take on it, is this was a huge mixed use luxury apartments in the Northeast. Similar to previously, we were hired by the real estate developer. We worked with them a lot, so they knew that they can have faith on our capabilities. And in this case, the contractor was assessing 400 days of delays against them. So the way we tried to take this project on is, first of all, assess the quality of the schedule updates. And what we were regularly finding was the contractor would say, hey, this activity is complete. And then we go to the daily report and we found out that that activity was not complete. And all the activities that were on the owner delay side of things, they were never completed. They would keep getting pushed out. And that's where we first understood that the quality of these schedules are not great. The projected dates are incorrect. And in a lot of cases on the critical path, even the logic ties were incorrect. So overall, what we initially talked about, poor schedule quality being a huge concern. Then secondly, and this is where contractor obviously running their own schedules come into this discussion, the contractor was making logic changes so that they can support their claim. So they knew something was getting delayed. They didn't have the right logic in there to start with. A month before the delay is supposed to happen, they will change the logic, and then it would suddenly be more critical than it was before. And then at the end, you can see all their delay claims that they were making, 50% of them were just logic changes that they made to support their claim. And this is where the manipulation of the logic comes from, because if you look at just the critical path of the schedule, everything looked like the owner was at fault for all these delays. But once you start getting into these individual logic changes, then you were able to realize that there was a lot of float. The owner thought that there was hundreds of days of float for these activities. Next month it became critical, and then it immediately became a huge concern, and the owner had no chance to respond to that kind of a change of float. So we found those kind of issues. Then delays due to contractors delay in submissions. They were not submitting RFIs on time. They found an RFI a month ago. They didn't submit anything, and then it became a huge issue, and then it's the fault of the owner. So making those things stand out for us, that this is always a much more deeper dive. And just to even say, hey, if you have a good expert, or it will just do the job, that's not even accurate. I'll say the experts and your construction team, your project managers, the people who are there every day, have to collaborate to figure out these issues, because guess what, all the projected dates, there's no way we could have identified them alone. We had to look at daily reports, we had to look at emails, we had to go back to the project manager and say, hey, can you find out what happened here? And then they came back with some kind of a documentation to say that's the right date. So it's a very collaborative effort to create something like this. But even after having all these issues, you would think it's a slam dunk, and the contractor is for fault for a lot of this. That's not true either. And we made sure that our owner realizes that they have some skin in the game as well. And when we eventually looked at the complete picture, we determined that 40% of the delays were because of the contractor, uh, and there was another 24% of concurrent delays. But still, for as poor of a claim that was prepared, there was still 38% of the delay was still legitimate. So I think that's what the more we do it, the more I'm realizing that from a claim avoidance point of view, you should not come to the table thinking one thing or another. So some measures that we have kind of summarized from our case studies, which is first of all, resolve the change orders timely and in writing. The owner has generally a leverage early on in the project, especially if they're being fair. You would see that they get some advantages, and using that leverage to negotiate a better change order, especially when everybody hasn't decided what their positions completely are. And then in case of lack of agreement, what we have done, and this is more again on the claim avoidance piece, as soon as you come on board, realize that it, like I said, it will not be all or nothing positions. And usually when you talk to the owners, you will see that, there is an expectation that all of this will go away, and communicating with the owner about the expectation. And that's why I say if there is a smoke, there is a fire. And even in the work schedules, even in everything else like that, you will still find that contractors' claim to some extent is legitimate. And that's where the next point comes in, which is what's fair. And early on in the negotiating position, that's a little bit easier, because on the contractor and owner side, you can at least say, here's the complete analysis. This is what we have found. And like I said, refrain from only pointing out just random events, but overall saying, this is what I think it's fair. And making sure your side understands that as well. Next, early in the resolution process, again, like I said, get the professionals early. Now we're doing projects in which we're almost on a project from a month-to-month basis from the start of the project, and resolving this when these are happening in real time, instead of coming 2 years down the line from a project and not knowing what our position says. The next being collaboratively bring the project teams together to complete the project. One thing that we kind of forget in all this is there's probably another, the project is still ongoing. So if both parties realize shortcomings in their positions early on, the likelihood of the resolution would go up. Then damages, I would say for delay, make sure first you realize what the delay positions are and resolve those first, instead of saying, hey, here's the daily rate, here's the total dollar amount, because at some point people start thinking in dollars and they want to make $500,000 claim, 200,000. But before you do any of that, make sure you realize what your delay numbers are, what's your delay positions, before you go too deep in the dollar conversations early on. And then lastly, making sure the project completion is still the priority. A lot of times what we have seen is once these issues starts to come up, a lot of general contractors will make sure that that project is not the priority, because they kind of mentally think that they're losing money on this project. So how do you make sure you resolve that change order, but at the same time, make sure the project is completed? Because for the owner, that's the number one priority. How can we complete the project as early as possible? So that's kind of what I had in mind. I'd love to hear any thoughts, any questions that anybody has.
All right. Does anybody have any questions for Avi? Okay. Well, Avi, thank you very much for your presentation. That was pretty informative, and it's certainly something that comes up in my practice a lot. So I appreciate you taking the time to kind of go through these issues with us.